homework problems. Number 9. Let's see, Kate, you gave me yours, didn't you? I don't know if you want to.
Oh, well, no.
Alright.
Oh, and John gave me. Not number 9? Any questions on? And I actually didn't look at those yet, you guys. I just took them off your hands if you didn't want to risk losing them.
Well, I don't know if you can really even read this. So.
13 was a little.
13? 13. Are you talking about 13 or a different one? 17?
No, I was saying 17.
That's what
Okay, any particular part of it, or you kind of just want to run overview of it, Renson?
Well, just part A kind of had like stop me.
Okay.
Because it was more about like figuring out the budget conscious.
The incentive compatible part?
Yeah.
Alright, so Rockaway Piano wishes to sell a piano to everyone, but some consumers are budget conscious, others are not. Unfortunately, Rockaway cannot tell which is which. So Rockaway produces a premium line of pianos that it markets under the name Rockaway name, and a similar line of pianos under Dundee. While the cost of producing these pianos is quite similar, all consumers agree that Rockaway pianos are of higher quality than Dundee pianos and would be willing to pay more for the Rockaway. Budget-conscious consumers feel that Dundee pianos are worth $6,000, Rockaways are worth $8,000. Performance artists believe that Dundee pianos are worth $7,000 and Rockaways are worth $12,000. Okay. So how'd you guys approach this one? So with A, suppose Rockaway and Daughter's prices, it's Dundee pianos at $5,000 and Rockaway pianos at $10,500. Are these prices incentive compatible? That is, will more price-conscious consumers purchase the Dundee line while the performance-oriented players choose the Rockaway? So what'd you guys do?
Well, I didn't really get how, because like I was thinking of that graph that we did, and then you had to have like a negative area.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't picture this graph.
Well, with this one, you guys, how did you guys do it? You didn't do it.
You can't really do that on a sensational quantity.
Right. This is more of a table type situation. Maybe you guys can help me out here with so we got kind of the willingness to pay towards the end of the problem. So it's kind of similar to that the workout one we did with Abe, Eddie, and Chris, right? So we got kind of their willingness to pay here. The Dundees, so budget conscious, BC people are willing to pay $6 for the Dundee and $8 for the Rockaway. And the performance artists are willing to pay 7 and 10. Or 7 and 12, yeah. So I'd approach it like this, kind of, just for starters to think about the willingness to pay. Now this then, Brenson, is, kind of like mapping out the demand curve. If there was a curve that was given to us, it's like the demand for these guys and the demand for these guys would be some other more inelastic curve or whatever. But all we're observing is 1 point on their demand curves. Presumably they're paying one piano, because people don't tend to buy multiple pianos. So one piano is, $6,000 for the Dundee, and one piano is, whatever. So we're just kind of picking off points on demand curves. And now if we have the prices at 5, so if the price of the Dundee is 5,000 and the price of the Rockaway is 10,500, where'd you guys go from here?
Well, you kind of look at the consumer surplus, at the gain of the consumer, at that price of each type of consumer
Okay, so you looked at how much each one is gaining.
from buying. Each.
So at a price of 5,000 for the Dundee, these guys get 5,000 or 1,000, right? So these guys, let me just I'll put it this way, a little note here. These guys are, maybe I should do that over here, I don't know. I'm just kind of winging it here. So +1 for the budget conscious people and +2, I guess I did need it kind of Dundee here, +2, maybe I'll go back to that. Where's my eraser? On the Dundees. And on the Rockways at 10.5, what are these guys going to do? Not buy it. So they're out of the market. And the performance artists will get the 1,500. So they're just going to buy it. So they're kind of out. And then kind of start to work the problem that way. Does that help to kind of set it up that way? Okay. Did you guys set it up differently, or any tips on that, or is that kind of the approach you took?
After I checked some of my answers wrong, I set it up that way.
Okay. So you tried to work it out on your own first before looking at the answer? Yeah. It's a good way to challenge yourself, to stretch yourself and see how you do it, and then kind of go back. I didn't even look at that.
So I mean, really, you're wanting them to feel better when they buy a Rockway.
The performance.
Yeah, the performance artist, but still feel like they're getting a better deal by buying better.
Like this one did. This one doesn't include it.
I'm not sure if I'd look at it that way exactly. And the reason I say that is I think you're producing the product at whatever quality. You've kind of made that decision prior. And now we've got the Rockway, and the question is, do I price it at 15,000? Do I price it at 10.5? Do I price it at, what can I price it at to extract the most amount of money from my consumer who's willing to pay 12? Of course, I don't really know that for sure, or to get them sorted into it.
On part B, it asks about decreasing the price of the Rockway,
Okay.
and it says to decrease it by a minimum of 500. Understood, and then it says, but it should decrease by less than 3,500. I didn't understand why less than 3,500.
Because if it decreased by less than 3,500, they would purchase the Dundee instead.
I think so. That's probably what they're getting at, because then we're down to 7,000, and that's where we get down to the Dundee. And part of this, I don't know if they explicitly say it or not, but they basically are saying the cost of producing both is about the same for the producer, right? They're just, which we know goes on, generic brand goods. The appliance business has been famous for this too. The Amana range versus the whatever weird, off-brand name, and electronics for
Starbucks
Sony.
in Kirkland, if you're aware of that.
Oh, I'm not aware of that one.
Sam's Club.
Yeah, Kirkland is Starbucks.
Yeah.
Ooh.
If you go and it says on like the big bulk Kirkland boxes, by Starbucks is what it says, literally. And right next to it you have the big Starbucks box of coffee.
Huh.
And so I was at Starbucks.
Where did you hear that?
A buddy of mine works for one of the Starbucks up in.
I might have to try Kirkland.
So it's like-
Okay,
it's like,
I've seen
yeah,
that
it's
Kirkland
literally
brand.
the same, and it's like maybe 75% cheaper.
Yeah.
when you
Huh.
buy bulk.
Interesting. Yeah, they probably sell it in the big things, which is usually how I buy it. The economy pack. Okay.
Did you grind your own coffee?
Something we used to, but we go through it quick enough that I kind of gave up on that. But we have a little grinder thing too, but we don't tend to use that too much. Okay, anything else on homework?
On on 17, just on E, I wasn't sure exactly how they, like, I understood the prices that they got, or like I understood the prices when I saw graphs, but I'm not sure how they originally found the $2 price for the third tier.
Okay. Anybody want to comment on that one?
Well, like it talked about splitting the demand curve into 4 equal parts, but I didn't understand why you wanted to do that.
I thought it was like you divided it basically like kind of like 3 equal parts, and then like just came out with a price. I thought that was $2 for like the tier A.
I think you're right. I think that's what they did.
Because they already had the price of $1.50 to $1.
I think it was somewhat arbitrary, and probably the theory behind in splitting it evenly. If you've got a demand curve that looks like this, we know that perfect price discrimination, we charge it for every unit. And so the more we can stair step, the closer we get to taking all of the consumer surplus that's available. So I think that's all they did is split it. Good question. All right, anything else on homework? You feel like now you're going to be all sensitive to pricing strategies and see them out there? They're all over the place. Okay, well, we turn those in then. And today we move into imperfect competition, the middle ground, the middle of the road. The combinations. So, on our spectrum of competition, we've hit the two extremes, perfect competition and monopoly. And I like that this book kind of lumps imperfect competition together in one chapter. Monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So, unlike the name suggests, monopolistic competition is a little closer to competition, and oligopoly is probably somewhere a little closer to monopoly. What you're going to see in intermediate class compared to principles class is that there's a number of different other cases in between. And so we'll talk about a few more models that probably stretch the boundaries and add a few more checks of drifting this way with monopolistic competition or drifting this way with monopoly, or this way for that matter. So we'll get into a few more specific models. What were the characteristics that were altered in these two market structures? So we had a price taker over here. It's helpful to think about that. We had, what do we got? Large number of sellers. What else? Homogeneous product, agricultural products, and free entry and exit. And that's really what kept things in check, kept profits in check in terms of long run profits equal to zero. Monopoly at the other end of the spectrum, we had, what's the main thing we've got? Barriers. The barriers to entry of some sort, one seller, and homogeneous homogeneous product by definition. Although we did look at some possibilities of a multi-product monopolist. So, and we talk about bundling, and so we kind of complicated things a little bit there with using your market power in different ways. Okay, so now the middle ground. Which of these assumptions do we shake up for monopolistic competition? People, what do you mean? Large number of sellers, yes, so that stays the same. What changes? Yeah, monopolistic competition only. Yeah. So large sellers. What's that? Yeah, the differentiated products. So not different, but differentiated. So we have basically a fast food hamburger, but one of them is flame broiled, one of them's pan fried, one's got sesame seed bun, one's got an onion bun. So they're differentiated, not different. And entry exit, free. So that then serves the same purpose it did with perfect competition. That's going to keep economic profit in check and normal. On the oligopoly end, what assumption did we tweak? Few sellers. So now we've got these few sellers. Because there's a few of them, one company's decision is going to have an impact on another company. So they're interdependent. And that's where we get into game theory stuff. So interdependent sellers. What do we mean by few? Really, the definition that we use for a few here is few enough such that their choices are interdependent with each other. That, you know, so that one has an impact on the other in terms of decision making. So whatever that number turns out to be, it could be 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 10, maybe it's 12, but it's a few. We have some barriers to entry. And the type of product could be anything, differentiated or homogeneous, like we have in the case of oil and OPEC. So they have a homogeneous good. We have a differentiated product in maybe U.S. auto industry and Boeing Airlines producing jetliners. There's a differentiated product there. Airbus, yeah, Airbus and Boeing, classic that. I might have. What was it?
It's like the largest order Airbus has ever gotten for, it might have been Southeast Asia.
For the Asia airline, yeah, I think I did hear something like that.
And they were like, we don't even know if that's even right to do that.
If it's possible. Well, and then the other airline, their big jet got recalled with the battery problem or whatever, so they've been struggling with that issue. Okay, so your textbook starts off with oligopoly and gets into game theory, which is an interesting jump. I'm going to start off with monopolistic competition, and it's a bit of a rehash on what we've done already, but I think having that clear will help you as you dive into chapter 11 with some of the oligopoly stuff. So, I want to first think about, I think I told you my Old MacDonald story before, so I think I'll rehash that a little bit. Sam didn't get the pleasure of Old MacDonald. Old MacDonald had a farm, and in the 1950s, he was kind of sick of farming, and so he decided he could do hamburgers kind of interesting and fast, and he was going to be able to provide consumers fast hamburgers. So he opened the first McDonald's in California in the 1950s. And since he was the only show in town, he was the innovator. He was the first one to the market, the true entrepreneur. He had himself a little monopoly. And it turned out there was a pretty good market for these burgers. So for the most part, let's go ahead and just assume a constant marginal cost curve. He would maximize profits just like any old monopolist would by producing the quantity of hamburgers where the revenue generated by the last one is equal to the cost of the last one. He'd charge the highest price people were willing and able to pay, which in that case was, let's say $1, probably more like 20 cents, but we'll try to keep our numbers a little higher. And being the only show in town, he would earn some nice profit from this. And so I guess with that average variable cost, let's see, we'd have, I'm drawing a blank here. We don't usually draw our average total cost in here. Well, average variable is for sure. What'd you say, Branson?
I thought that like market cost and average total cost were the same.
Not average total.
Average variable is, yeah. Well, let's put a little bit of slope into this. Oh no, it doesn't really matter. The average total cost would be doing something like this. There. It just hit me. It should have hit me a little sooner than that. So why? Because why? Average fixed cost. So average variable looks like this. Average fixed is the distance between, and they're still going to meet at the minimum point, but since it's constant, they would be meeting somewhere out in the distant future. So average total cost would be some curve going down, and so the average total cost of producing this 100 burgers per hour gives us a total cost of average total cost of 60 cents, and so we're making 40 cents per burger. All right, now the dynamics kick in. So he's making money. What's going to happen next with our monopoly situation under this context of fast food hamburgers? Entry. Whoops. Whoa, there goes the marker. Entry, right? So the signal's flashing entry, but there's no barriers to keep people from coming in. So, oh, you don't have to do that. Thanks. So we're going to have entry of firms into it. So a king over in Europe hears about some farmer that's running a hamburger business. He's like, well, geez, I can come to the United States and become the Burger King. And so he opens up a store right across the street from old Farmer McDonald. And I want to think about what's the impact of that in this picture. So if this is the demand curve for fast food hamburgers with Old MacDonald producing, how does his world change when a differentiated product that's close opens up kitty corner across the street? More elastic, good. Anything else? So more elastic. Where's my golf club? It's golf club time. So is it going to become more elastic? Is this demand curve more elastic than the one I just drew?
Yeah.
Yes. Is that what it's going to happen? No. So what else besides being more elastic? I agree with more elastic, but there's a little more to the story. Kind of what? Straight. So shift.
Yeah.
Shift in. So shift this way. So if it was a parallel shift, we'd probably expect it to be cutting into the market, right? Why? Because we're starting to cut the market. They're sharing the market between each other. So if we're really thinking about old McDonald and we're thinking back to one way, actually I've never thought about drawing it this way. I don't know if this is going to be a little helpful or not, but we got the market and we got the representative firm, right? Just like perfect competition, demand curve in the market. Well, we'd have demand, supply, and the whole thing. And then what is the representative firm? If there's only one firm, then this picture comes over here. And it's identical, and that's the monopoly. That's kind of the story we told, right? That the monopolist faces the whole market demand curve. But now we've got two firms in the market, and so what does the representative firms look like? Well, the market still is nice and big maybe for fast food hamburgers, but what it looks like for the other person now is less, cut in half. So the demand for their hamburger, if at let's say roughly a price of $1, there was 100 hamburgers, now maybe it's going to be 50 hamburgers. So instead of being, let me try, if that was identical, then that would be there. I'm really kind of stretching things here, I realize. 50, right? So the representative firm, I've never done this before, so this is where I love learning, because I kind of learn myself here. So they get 50 at $1. They're going to split the market, the two Burger King and the McDonald's, and so their demand curve has changed. It's kind of shifted in and become more elastic, right? So that is going to be the representative firm of McDonald's, hamburgers, or Burger King's. Question on that? Let's get your hand up. Yeah.
So in this case then, is the market demand curve going to be like the vertical summation of all representative firms? Or is it not?
Yeah, it still will be ultimately, yes. Yeah.
Or not the, I mean.
Yeah. No, I know what you were saying, and then I said yes, and then I should have said no, because this is the consumers going here. So the supply will be the summation ultimately of the individual supplies that are going to the market.
So do the individual demand curves have anything to do with each other then compared to the overall?
Well, and this kind of ties nicely into, because I'm stretching the story here where we're getting into now just two firms, which would probably be more oligopoly, where they would compare to each other. So when we get into how firms react to each other, we're going to create reaction paths. This is something we did not do in principles class, but we're going to have these reaction paths that show what their response would be if the other firm does this, what their reaction is. And so here we're stretching things a little bit because we only got a couple firms, but their individual production is going to meet the market demand ultimately. All right, so let's come back to this picture is kind of this one starting to morph. And so imagine that their demand curve starts to get less, and I'm just going to kind of twist and flatten it. This is the demand with Burger King in the market. So it's really the demand for McDonald's hamburgers, but Burger King's in the market. And you can see what happened immediately is that if this is flattening, it's possible that I'm still, if the market's growing, I'm reducing, I'm kind of leaving the quantities out of it. The main thing I want to get across is that the prices are going to come down. So the price now, if this, we call this with BK, equals 80 cents. And now they're only making 20 cents per hamburger. And so as Wendy's opens up across the street, it gets cut again, it gets cut again. And so we're going to continue to see the entry occur until what? When does the entry of firms stop?
Once it's below the average
No. No. So not marginal revenue equals marginal cost, not below average variable cost or the variable cost, average total cost. So what does that mean? Entry stops when does the light stop blinking?
it goes below.
When it not goes below, when it's zero. So once it's zero, then it's like, oh, they're just earning a normal profit. I'll go make a cell phone company instead. The entrepreneur is looking for something where there's economic profit, the new stone being turned over. So existing industries, unless they're changing and morphing, which of course we know they are, making their hamburgers better and all that kind of stuff, existing industries are going to gravitate towards a normal profit due to free entry and exit. And so the picture that we get in the long run looks like this. Let's see. I'm saving the average total cost for the last. So marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Here we're going to produce this quantity, charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay. And I save the average total cost curve for last because it's going to look like this. Where price equals average total cost. Now, I showed it as there's a couple things that are going on if we think dynamically about the picture. Not only is their market getting cut into because of entry, but is it possible that their costs are going up? That's possible. Good. So there might be some interrelation. I hadn't thought about that one, Brett. I think that's worth an extra credit point. I haven't dished out too much on that avenue. So Brenton said that perhaps the supply chain is affected by the entry of firms, and that they might be bidding up input prices. So there could be an increase in cost that way. That's not thing I was thinking of. What else could be going on? Once McDonald's was all by itself, but now it's got Burger King there. Advertising is kind of the classic thing for monopolistic competition. So now all of a sudden, oh, I have to put that ad in the paper. You know, people always just came to my place, right? So all of a sudden you get into some advertising costs, which might start to change. In the case of advertising, your fixed costs could grow, which would cause average total cost to shift up, or possibly your marginal costs could grow if your input prices, like Brenton said, change. This thing could all be kind of shifting up on us. So at the same time, our market's getting cut into and flattened with the demand curve. We've got costs possibly going up. And so that's what keeps economic profits normal in monopolistic competition. So this picture here is the long run equilibrium in monopolistic competition. And it's probably more helpful to keep in some of those insights that we just did. So I want to list those. I did want to point out one thing that I kind of maybe blue when I drew this. Ideally, I would show a flatter demand curve because it is expected to be relatively elastic. So I probably drew this one a little steeper than the picture's fine in terms of the way everything turned out, but let's add that to our notes here on monopolistic competition. So number one, demand is more elastic, relatively elastic. In other words, pretty flat. Now, if we get real technical and we go back to our elasticity chapter, what causes the demand to be elastic that's going on here? How would you pin that down? Why do we expect it to be fairly flat?
It's like moving
It is, but I want to say why is it starting to look like that? We had entry of firms, so we got McDonald's, Wendy's, everybody starts coming into the fast food market. What's causing the demand for a McDonald's hamburger to be relatively
Because the
elastic?
price is changing, whereas the quantity is on the
The price is like they don't have to pay a super high price at McDonald's. They can just less.
Right, so they can go somewhere else. So the thing I was wanting to pin it down to is the availability of substitutes. The availability of substitutes is kind of the key thing that's going on. So that's what's now changed in the marketplace. They don't have as much market power or pricing power as they did before. If they raise their price too much, just like you articulated, people are going to run away. Right? You jack up that price of the hamburger, even just 10 cents, I'm going across the street to Burger King. So very elastic demand. So we'd expect it to be fairly flat. So demand is more elastic because of the high availability of substitutes. As a side thing, we might say that firms entered. So free entry led to lots of substitutes, lots of competition. Now, if you think about it, that's what monopolistic competitors are always struggling to do. How do I make my hamburger a little bit different? How do I make it a little bit better? And then they start to add in bundling to that too, right? So maybe if I have a frozen Coke, I just happen to go through this, who's in there? Yeah, Kate's in there in business ethics. If I start to bundle my Happy Meal with a frozen icy Coke, and McDonald's doesn't have that icy machine, and I have a contract with my supplier, Coca-Cola, to provide that, special to my store, then that might give me a little bit more unique product to kind of help take away from the substitutability. So yes, if you just purely look at my hamburger, it's substitute, but if you treat it as a bundle, the hamburger plus the icy Coke is a little less elastic, right? And so we're kind of starting to think in terms of what I do with my business and how it affects demand to try to be more profitable ultimately. Okay. Another note that I want to do here. Definitely want to include profits equals 0. Economic profit equals 0 due to the entry and exit. Oh, I wanted to comment on the cost going up as well as the demand. So entry causes a shift in or left and flattening of demand curve. that's what we just went over. Allocative efficiency, deadweight loss. Let's talk about that stuff. Allocative efficiency happens where on this picture? Demand equals marginal cost, because the demand curve is the marginal benefit curve. Good. And if we want to get technical before we get to externalities, it's the marginal social benefit curve. Right? So society's benefits are reflected in the consumers who are purchasing this good. So this is the allocatively efficient quantity. And if we went and calculated our deadweight loss, we'd get this picture, just like we've had before. Now, as the demand curve flattens out, which we've kind of made comment of here in multiple places because it's an important point, as this demand curve that I have pictured here gets flatter and flatter, what happens to the deadweight loss? It gets smaller, right? So, and this quantity, does it move this direction or this direction as it becomes flatter? This direction. So we're starting to get closer to the allocatively efficient quantity. So as we flatten out the demand curve, then marginal revenue would equal marginal cost, if we're following the rules there, would equal here, right? If I make it even flatter, then marginal revenue equals marginal cost here. We can start to see that we're getting closer and closer to allocative efficiency. And ultimately, if it becomes perfectly flat through competition, we're in perfect competition. And so that's one thing to note here as a nice result that we get from competition. It's kind of our insight of why we, especially in the United States, attempt to preserve competition. Is that, yes, we can have differentiated products, but we want alternatives available. So we allow the firms to have some market power, but we're getting close to wiping out most of that deadweight loss by having competition. So let's see. Let's put on here Q star does not equal QAE. So it's not allocatively efficient. Not allocatively efficient. But the deadweight loss shrinks, and QAE minus Q star shrinks, the difference between those two. So deadweight loss shrinks, and the distance between what's allocatively efficient and what's being produced in the market shrinks as demand flattens. And put the technical term back in, becomes more elastic, which is exactly what we're predicting is going to happen from the entry anyway. All right, we will call it a day there.